What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the second ever edition of Touchline Talk. I'm your host, Josh Storing. We're going to get to the soccer in a minute here, but I wanted to start with something that's related but is not specific to what's happened on the field these past couple of days. As a sports media person, I not only enjoy talking about sports, but I also enjoy sort of looking at members of the sports media, evaluating, learning from them, watching what they're doing, figuring out what I might want to implement into, my own career as I move forward, things that I disagree with, just trying to sort of use them to figure out who I want to be as a journalist, as a broadcaster, as somebody in sports media. And generally speaking, I don't have strong feelings about show hosts in terms of not a radio show or something like that, but someone who hosts a show with analysts. So we're talking about your first takes or your first things first or something like that, one of those type of shows. That changed in December 2008 when I saw what NBC's Rebecca Lowe did in response and in the aftermath of Raheem Sterling being racially abused by a Chelsea fan. NBC did this segment where it was just Rebecca Lowe and Robbie Earle, who has 200 plus Premier League appearances and happens to be black. He's one of NBC's go-to analysts. They kind of have a 3-person rotation. He's very good at what he does. It was just the two of them in the studio. And Rebecca Lowe asked a question that I have never heard or seen anything quite like since. It caught my attention and it has stuck with me to this day. So they were talking about sort of Raheem Sterling's response to this awful treatment he received at the hands of a Chelsea fan. And Rebecca Lowe looked at Robbie Earle and she said, as a white person, I can't understand what this feels like. Can you, as somebody who has experienced similar things as a black person, sort of enlighten our audience and tell me what it feels like the best way that you can? I had never heard a host do something like that before. I thought it was one of the best questions I have ever seen asked. It was powerful. It was not intrusive in any way. It was just Rebecca Lowe moving the conversation forward in a positive direction that allowed her analyst to have a voice and to make positive change in the world. And she did something again that was somewhat similar this week in the aftermath of the White Lives Matter Burnley flag flying over the Manchester City-Burnley match. Again, it was Robbie Earle and Kyle Martino, who's a white analyst, were in the studio with Rebecca Lowe. And after Robbie Earle, as he always does, articulately lays out issues relating to race and talking about sort of the implicit biases that you see in society and how that impacts black people, Rebecca sort of transitioned the conversation to Kyle Martino by saying, it's terrible that Robbie just had to describe all of that stuff, but it's important for us as white people to sort of understand that and to really digest it and comprehend it, because that's the way things are going to get better. And then Kyle Martino gave his very powerful reaction. It's a small thing, but athletes are not the only people in sports media who have a platform, who have an opportunity to make the world a better place, to enact positive change. And so I just wanted to take that moment to give a shout out to Rebecca Lowe and anybody who wants to host a show like that. She is the face of NBC's Premier League coverage in the United States. That is no small deal. Or just anybody who wants to sort of figure out how to have these conversations. I cannot suggest highly enough going and watching the way NBC is handling this and the way that Rebecca Lowe is facilitating these conversations. She's fantastic week in and week out when it comes to the soccer and everything else, but I've just never seen a host that is that good when it comes to these kind of difficult, important, but uncomfortable conversations. So I cannot stress highly enough how valuable it is to have people like Rebecca Lowe covering the sport, and she is as good as it gets. Everybody can learn something from what she's doing. All right, so more onto the pitch now. A lot of people are at least criticizing or complaining about what these games have looked like in the return since COVID-19 shut everything down. And my first question is simply, did you expect anything different? No, the games have not been particularly pleasing to watch, but these are a bunch of guys who have not played in a competitive environment for months. There's no reason to expect that they were going to be appealing. The other thing, and the reason that I don't necessarily buy into that as a criticism or something, I mean, it's valid in the sense that no, they haven't been great, but there are bad games every week regardless. But the other thing that is sort of keeping the quality of play up to a greater extent than it may appear at this moment in time is just the incredible goals that are being scored. Just in this past, even just yesterday, you had Sergei Milinkovic-Savic and Malinovsky score just beauties in the Atalanta-Lazio game that we're going to talk more about a little bit later. And then you had Liverpool. Trent Alexander-Arnold does what Trent Alexander-Arnold does, and Fabinho scores another fantastic goal that he also has a tendency to do. And then you sort of go back and look at just the string of goals we've seen so far, and even just in the Premier League. You throw Pedro Neto's Wolves goal, which is the epitome of what that team is, Ben Chilwell, and the equalizer that Watford scored right after that. And Nicolas Pepe's goal for Arsenal was fantastic until they imploded and ended up giving that game away to Brighton. Yes, the quality of play from just a visual standpoint, looking at what is happening over 90 minutes, isn't great. But that doesn't mean that there aren't terrific goals being scored. And you just got to sort of give everybody a break. It's going to get better as you get more into form, you get some more minutes under your belt. But at least at this moment in time, let's at least appreciate the quality of goals that we've gotten coming back, both in England and around the world. It could be much worse. Let's at least appreciate that we're getting some just fantastic strikes still. So we're going to just sort of go through what's happened in the Premier League these past couple of days since we last talked on Tuesday. We're going in sort of chronological order, sort of picking the highlights and things that are most important to talk about. Harry Kane got a goal. Surprise, surprise. Jose Mourinho was right, like I said on Tuesday. It's going to take him a little while because, again, he hasn't played in forever and was not in great form even before he got hurt before the COVID break. But it was a very Jose Mourinho performance. West Ham is not good in any way, shape, or form right now. But it was Harry Kane's goal was a well-worked counterattack. He had one earlier that you thought he probably should have finished. But that's also just him being rusty. And he got the second chance, and like the lethal finisher he is, he didn't make a mistake, tucked it away, and you could see the relief on his face and just the idea of being able to get that off of his back, and so now he could just move forward because it had been a while. It's been a tough stretch for him. But that's absolutely massive for Spurs. They needed that game just if they have any hope of trying to make things interesting and to finish this season strong. You just can't lose to West Ham. You can't do it. That's the point West Ham is at right now. But again, it's not, and now you got this Tanguy and Ndombele thing. Mourinho, it's not fair to go and say that Mourinho is the problem. This team has not been good since Pochettino, the last year under Pochettino. They have some flaws. We talked about it on Tuesday, but it's not an attack. They're still good. So it's not really it's too early to come after Mourinho, but it's also fair to keep asking the same questions that you ask all the time about Mourinho. Can he work with young players? Is he comfortable having young players on his team for a club that doesn't particularly spend money? Is he going to be okay with the tight budget that Daniel Levy has? And can he actually work with today's players? You're seeing it with, as I mentioned, Tanguy and Ndombele, who apparently just doesn't want to play for him, and it's already a mess. But it's too early to pass judgment on any of that. The reality is they're basically in the same spot they were before he took over. he hasn't had long enough to actually try and do anything to make substantial change. They got a clean sheet, which is good because they've been leaking goals. It's not a Mourinho team yet, but let's hold off on saying that it's an absolute failure so far, what he's done and the time that he has. It's just too early to make any definitive statements about whether he's going to work long-term at Spurs or not. The other long-term thing, it's getting closer to the point where Manchester United just has to keep Paul Pogba around because he and Bruno Fernandes are really good together. They absolutely pulverized Sheffield. They got the goals. Marcus Rashford probably should have had another 2, in addition to setting up Martial's first of his hat trick. And, Pogba is an interesting character. There are real questions about where he can play, particularly in a system where now you have a clear number 10 who is good enough to be playing at Manchester United. But as long as you have somebody, whether it's Nemanja Matic, Scott McTominay, covering that ground in front of the central defenders, sort of behind where Pogba likes to go, you got to play both of them. And it's at least worth giving Pogba some time, unless he asks to leave, to see if this thing can work. Because the hesitancy is that we've seen this before from Manchester United in short bursts. You look at what happened right when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got that job. They can look good at times, and then they have a really poor stretch. I'm still not sold on them. I'm still sticking with my prediction that Wolves is going to end up in 5th. But you can't deny that this team has looked really good, and another comprehensive performance against Sheffield. I'm also not sold on Solskjaer, but again, at this point, you're so invested in it, you can't give up on him now. There was a time where you could have turned the page and gone to somebody else. Ed Woodward and company chose not to. So now you gotta give him a chance to finish this thing and then go into next season and see what he can do with theoretically a healthy Pogba playing with Bruno Fernandes. I really like Pogba in that deeper lying role where he doesn't have to play defense as much, but he can sort of be that person that turns defense into offense. That quick transition, getting the ball up to Bruno Fernandes, up to Marcus Rashford, and whoever else you're gonna play up top. So you can't deny what Manchester United's doing right now. It's not a consistent enough stretch of form over a period of time for me to really change my thoughts on them. But that was a very impressive performance, and they're going to at least make things interesting and have some interesting discussions, where it looked like a couple times this year it was to the point where they're about to just sort of give up on this project. Solskjaer is doing just enough to sort of keep the hope, keep the positivity that things may actually get significantly better in the near future, which is more than we could have said a month or 2 ago. Speaking of Wolves, not the greatest performance in the world against Bournemouth, but again, Adama Traore cross to Raul Jimenez, goal, and you got yourself 3 points. Bournemouth is in a really tough spot. It's hard for me to say that they should have just sort of capitulated to Ryan Fraser when Ryan Fraser is on the record saying he wasn't really focused because he was too consumed with his contract. That was even before the whole COVID thing happened. So I understand why Eddie Howe kept him out, and they've just been ravished by injuries. David Brooks is not a game changer enough for me to think that they're going to find a way to get out of this. But the good news for them is that everybody behind them and around them in the relegation zone is not doing anything to take them out of contention for staying up. I mean, Aston Villa got a point against Newcastle, but that's about all that's happened, which means, again, the real winner in this thing is Brighton, who has 4 points from 2 games, and another, maybe even a point, definitely 3, should be plenty to keep them up. But from the Villa perspective, you go 1 down against Newcastle, and Tyrone Mings has been so good this year. I feel like it's unfair to lump him into the defensive struggles and mistakes that they've had, he's really had to clean up a lot of other people's messes and has done a pretty good job of it so far. But Andy Carroll gets the ball out wide and he gets pulled into that, which leaves this gaping hole. That's how Dwight Gale got through. That's why Newcastle got that goal. Mings is going to want that one back, but I'm not going to, they would be in a much, maybe not a much worse spot, but a significantly worse spot if he hadn't been as good as he's been all year. So it's just a tough moment for him. But they go back, they get the equalizer, and at this point, that's really all you can ask for because nobody else is getting any points down there. I mean, Watford got one, but they're not even in the relegation zone. You're really talking about, Norwich is good as relegated, and Bournemouth doesn't look like they're posing any kind of serious threat to string points together. So this is absolutely there for Aston Villa. They've at least been competitive coming out of the COVID break and Project Restart. They haven't capitalized on their opportunities, specifically against Chelsea, but Dean Smith's team is there's a chance they pull this out, which is something I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. So they, in a sense, have come out as winners so far, but you also, if they don't end up getting themselves safe, they really only have themselves to blame because nobody is really taking the initiative and making sure that they're not the team that gets relegated. It's really just kind of a mess, and the question of, who can get a win at some point here. All right, so that is our first segment for today. We're going to come back with our comprehensive preview of the NWSL Challenge Cup, which starts on Saturday. Sort of the key names to know on every team. There are also a significant amount of players that you might have heard of that aren't playing for a variety of reasons. So we're going to get into all of that right after this break. We'll be back soon. Welcome back to Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. Thanks so much for joining us today. So as I mentioned before the break, we have soccer in the United States starting this weekend, Saturday, June 27th. The NWSL Challenge Cup is taking place in Utah. It kicks off with the Courage and Thorns, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, again on the 27th. The strange thing about this, though, is that we're gonna go through the 8 teams that are playing, but there are 9 NWSL teams in the league. And I mentioned this very, very briefly on Tuesday, but the Orlando Pride are not participating after a COVID outbreak on their team that seems to have come from a trip to a bar, which was legally allowed. They didn't do anything wrong from a legal perspective, but at the same time, first and foremost, we hope that those players are healthy again soon and that everything is okay. Obviously, it's incredibly disappointing for that entire team not to be able to compete. It's also one of those things where you just sort of have to wonder why they felt that this was a good idea, knowing for weeks that this was coming up on the 27th and that teams were coming to Utah this week. But I'm not here to judge anybody's choices. It was it was irresponsible, but that's it's the price you pay. You got to feel for the players who didn't participate in that, but nevertheless, it is what it is. People can make choices. There are just sometimes consequences, and so unfortunately, we only have 8 teams competing in this tournament. We're going to sort of just go through alphabetically and highlight some things that you need to know about these teams before the Challenge Cup kicks off. So the Chicago Red Stars made the NWSL final last season. They were defeated by the North Carolina Courage. The big names you need to know here are Julie Ertz, prominent member of the U.S. women's national team. She's married to Philadelphia Eagles tight end Zach Ertz, and Tierna Davidson, who has now stepped into the U.S. national team fold, is an incredibly young, promising center back, number 1 overall pick in the draft. She was playing with the U.S. team while she was still at Stanford. Those are your 2 prominent names. They're both playing. Our X factor for the Chicago Red Stars is Kalia Watt. They brought Kalia Watt in to be the replacement for Sam Kerr, who was arguably the best striker in the league. She then left to go to Chelsea. They had some contract things they couldn't figure out, and so all of a sudden Chicago was left without a striker. That's where Watt comes in. She had previously been with the Houston Dash, but they traded for her. She is the goal scorer. That's going to be her responsibility. She's got some real talent behind her. This is a well-built team with some depth and some creative pieces, and then some really solid defense, particularly with Ertz and Davidson. But the sort of the name to know and the person that's going to determine whether this team can go compete and make a final again is going to be whether Kalia Watt can transition into that goal-scoring number 9 role effectively and quickly, because this is basically a 1-month sprint. It's a World Cup style tournament. You've got to hit the ground running and then be consistent through your 5, 6, 7, 8 games, however many you're going to play. Second team is the team that Watt used to play for, the Houston Dash. The only real prominent name from an international standpoint on this team is Rachel Daly. She's an England international, and she's also the X factor because they lost a significant amount of their goal scoring from last season. Not only Watt, but Watt was a huge part of that. So it's really Rachel Daly time. This team is going to go as far as she can take them. The expectations are not high. They very well might be the least talented of these 8 teams that are competing. But that's the name you need to know for Houston. They're just sort of in a rebuilding, transitional phase. So there's going to be a lot of new faces. It's going to be a new look team. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can sort of gel quickly and figure this out. But at the end of the day, they just don't have the talent and the international cachet, if you will, of some of the other teams. Then we have the North Carolina Courage, who are the defending champions, clearly the best team in the league since they entered. Their significant standout names include Abby Dahlkemper, Crystal Dunn, Samantha Mewis, Jessica McDonald, who are all regular members of the U.S. women's national team. They might not be the highest profile names. It's not Megan Rapinoe, Rose Lavelle, Julie Ertz, Alex Morgan. But at the same time, this is easily the deepest team in the league. They are just incredibly gifted. They are one of the most dominant teams in American sports right now. That is indisputable based on what they've done the last couple seasons since they became the North Carolina Courage. And in addition to all of those U.S. national team members I just referenced, the X factor and sort of the creative force of this team is Brazilian international Debinha. She had 8 goals, 7 assists last year. A lot of these U.S. international, these international caliber players are playing sort of in specific roles. Samantha Mewis isn't necessarily a goal scorer. Crystal Dunn sometimes plays attack, sometimes plays left back. They're not sort of game changers necessarily in and of themselves, and they're not that creative force in midfield. That is absolutely Debinha. She complements all of these other incredibly talented players really well. This is absolutely North Carolina's tournament to lose, just like the NWSL's is theirs to lose these past couple of seasons. It does create an interesting situation, though, just in the sense that this is a knockout tournament, so anything can happen. Everybody's going to make the knockout stage because there are only 8 teams, but after that, you have one bad game, you're out. So I am very curious to see whether North Carolina can sort of take their sustained dominance over a full typical season and then carrying that into the playoffs, whether they can summon that right away and just continue to dominate in a completely different type of competition. Next team is OL Reign. So this is the team in Seattle, but they are now owned by Olympique Lyon in France, which is why there's the name change. This is our first big name that's missing the tournament. Megan Rapinoe has decided not to play. This is her club team. It's a massive loss for them. She obviously is one of the best players in the world and just has an incredible ability to be creative and generate attack that is... It's just on an absolutely elite level. You see it all the time with the women's national team. She's internationally renowned, and so it is unfortunate for this tournament that she's not going to be participating. The big name that will be there for the Reign is Allie Long. She's in and out of the U.S. national team, plenty of experience, just not the same caliber as player, obviously, as a Megan Rapinoe. The X Factor is Sofia Huerta, who was also part of that Houston Dash team, and so as they started to rebuild, she comes in to the Reign. She's a goal scorer and a creative force. She just sort of does a little bit of both as an attacking-minded player. Again, without Megan Rapinoe, this team needs creativity, this team needs goals. One of the big questions for them is whether Huerta can come right in and provide that and sort of keep that offense rolling even without having the option of Megan Rapinoe. Portland Thorns already knew that they were going to be missing Tobin Heath. That was announced when the rosters came out, but in the last 24 hours, their goalkeeper, Adriana Franch, has also had to back out of this tournament due to injury reasons, which puts them in sort of a tough spot. Again, Tobin Heath is one of those really creative wingers, just like Megan Rapinoe, that is incredibly hard to stay in front of. So losing that in itself is a big blow, but then you also lose your goalkeeper. The big names that will be there, Becky Sauerbrunn and Lindsey Horan. Lindsey Horan may be the best box-to-box midfielder in the world. This is a well-run organization. They are always good. This is the kind of team that you look at in a situation like this, and you have to feel pretty good. They just always, just like their counterpart in MLS, Portland Timbers, maybe it's not always great in the regular season, but they're always there. They always make the playoffs. They're always dangerous. Both of these teams sort of have the same DNA in that sense. The Thorns X Factor, Christine Sinclair, she was their leading goal scorer last season. She is one of the most decorated international players of all time. She's played in countless World Cups for Canada. She's scored a bazillion goals. Again, without your Tobin Heath, you need that person that's going to put the ball in the back of the net. Sinclair's been doing it for decades. And the question is, as she continues to get to that back end of her career, can she continue to produce at the same level and can she carry an attack? So that'll be interesting to see. That's Portland's situation. The other team that has been massively hurt by injuries, more than any other team in this league, is Sky Blue FC. Both Carly Lloyd and Mallory Pugh, proven U.S. internationals, obviously Lloyd is incredibly prominent, are out due to injury. They both wanted to play, but can't for injury reasons, which leaves the biggest name on this team as McCall Zerboni, who was playing with North Carolina. She has been very much on the fringe of the U.S. national team, but has never really been able to develop into a consistent performer for the national team that makes those World Cup rosters. She was one of the last people that got left off. Very, very good midfielder. I'm excited to see her in new surroundings where this team is very much built for her to be able to really showcase herself, just because they're young and you don't have your two most prominent attacking threats in Carly Lloyd and Mallory Pugh. So this is absolutely Zerboni's team. I'm very excited to see what she can do and whether this Sky Blue team that is really trying to transform its identity as a club can take another step forward in this kind of scenario. And, they're not in any real shape of a threat to win this thing. But can they sort of take the next step in their progression so that when you get back into regular a regular season in 2021, all of a sudden they're ready to compete for the playoffs and sort of take that next step and continue to build into one of the more respected franchises in this league. They've just had a lot of off the field issues that they've been dealing with, and their perception is not great. But since sort of their change in the front office, things have been seeming to look up, and this is another opportunity to prove that they're headed in the right direction. The X factor for them is Midge Purce, who scored 8 goals for Portland last season. They made a trade this offseason. Again, without these big-time names, Mallory Pugh, Carly Lloyd there, they need somebody to put the ball in the back of the net. That is what Midge Purce does. She is the other one who really sort of benefits from this situation, that she's going to be the primary attacking threat with Zerboni in midfield. So that's the name to watch there. The Utah Royals are missing Kristen Press, another incredibly creative winger for the U.S. women's national team, who scores some incredible goals. She's got just terrific technical ability. So that leaves their big name is Kelly O'Hara, right back for the U.S. women's national team, World Cup champion, proven without a doubt. And the X factor is Amy Rodriguez, who has been in and out of the U.S. national team leading 9 goals in 2019. Again, without that Kristen Press caliber player there, can Rodriguez continue to put the goals in and keep this team in contention? It's going to be interesting to see whether they have enough to really make some noise here or not. I'm not sold that they do, but when you have somebody that's as proven a goal scorer as Amy Rodriguez, you always have a chance. And again, this is a knockout tournament, so who really knows what happens. Finally, the Washington Spirit. There's one big name, and that big name is Rose Lavelle. Probably nobody benefited more from the 2019 World Cup than Lavelle. She is just terrific, sort of can do everything in midfield. And this team hasn't been particularly successful in recent memory. It also didn't help that they didn't have her for most of last season. But when you have a Rose Lavelle on your team, she is one of those players that can absolutely take a game over and dictate the terms, and that's something that not every team in this league has. So it's when you have Rose Lavelle, you have a chance. It's just sort of to be determined whether this team has enough around her to match with the likes of Portland and North Carolina and Chicago, who have just such depth across the board. The X factor I'm going with here is Crystal Thomas. Ashley Hatch was the primary goal-scoring threat for this team last season. I'm curious to see if Thomas can sort of be that supplementary piece, and in addition to Lavelle chipping in some goals, but Lavelle is really at her best when she can be that creative force and sort of string the attack together and dictate the terms. So that means other people need to actually be on the finishing end of those passes and put the ball in the back of the net. That's what Hatch and Thomas do. But you really need more than one threat if you're going to compete for this thing. So I'm curious to see what Crystal Thomas can bring to this team. All right, so when we come back, we're going to sort of just take a look at everything happening in Europe over these next couple days, this weekend in particular. We've got big things have already happened in Italy, a title race in Spain, it's an FA Cup weekend in England, and the Bundesliga is also finishing up, so you won't want to miss that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Touchline Talk. We're going to wrap up the show today by just sort of looking ahead, as we're going to do every Thursday with everything that happens over the weekend. Obviously, it's the most jam-packed time soccer-wise. It's a weird situation now where, leagues are playing pretty much every day. Somebody's playing, but the extended break from today, Thursday, to when we come back on Tuesday, and just the prominence of weekends in this sport. We're gonna close every Thursday show by just sort of looking ahead at what's going to happen coming up over the weekend. So first, we're going to go to Germany. Germany is going to finish. This is the last game in the Bundesliga season. Bayern's already clinched the title. Dortmund's already clinched second, which really only leaves a couple things to be determined: the relegation battle and that the rest of the top four spots. So Werder Bremen is 2 points back of Fortuna Düsseldorf for the relegation playoff. I think it's fantastic that Germany does this, so that instead of automatically relegating that third team, they then make that third team have a playoff with the team from the second Bundesliga. So right now Düsseldorf's in that spot, but Bremen is only 2 points back, which means they still have hope of getting there. It seems like everybody has written Bremen off, especially watching some of their games, even the commentators, for weeks now, and I never really understood why. But yes, they can't. They've had a real difficult time scoring goals. They're not particularly good. But it's not like, again, sort of like we see in England, it's not like these teams around them are separating themselves and consistently picking up points. I think Dusseldorf, if I had to pick, I say Dusseldorf gets this spot and Werder Bremen is automatically relegated. That means young U.S. international Josh Sargent goes down to the second tier, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, just because he hasn't really been able to establish himself as a regular starter in the Bundesliga, even for a team that's struggling. He's shown some promise. He's a terrifically gifted player, but at this point in his career, I would not be upset if he spent a year in the lower division where he gets to play regularly, start getting that confidence, consistently start scoring goals, and then you come back up into the Bundesliga with a renewed sense of confidence and a more important place in this team. He's sort of he has started some, but he's more of just sort of a role player right now, where if they go down, he probably becomes a very prominent piece of this team. I'm not going to rule him out just because they have had some good performances recently, but it just hasn't been enough to really convince me that they're going to do this. Nonetheless, it's something interesting to pay attention to. And then we've got the other games listed here, which is the battle for the final Champions League spot between Leverkusen and Borussia Mönchengladbach. Leipzig is only 1 point ahead of Leverkusen, who's 2 points ahead. Leipzig's 3 points ahead of Leverkusen, who's 2 points behind Mönchengladbach, but Leipzig is going to win on goal difference, so they pretty much have third wrapped up. So this is between Leverkusen, Mönchengladbach. Mönchengladbach plays Hertha Berlin, and Leverkusen plays Mainz. Mönchengladbach has been so good all season. I don't think they're going to drop these points. Leverkusen is in an interesting spot just because of the Kai Havertz situation. They could really use the Champions League next year to entice him to stay. Seems like he already has wandering eyes, and when you're that good as a teenager, that there's a reason. He's absolutely spectacular. So that's the bigger implication here, is that maybe if they find a way to qualify for the Champions League, he stays another season, but that's only delaying the inevitable. He's a world-class talent who's going to end up at a Chelsea, a Bayern Munich, a Juventus, somebody in that category in the near future. So I talked on Tuesday about how Juventus is in some real trouble because they're in the thick of a title race with Lazio. They got knocked out of the Cup. Champions League isn't looking great. And then Lazio returns to the field for their first game since the COVID break. They score 2 goals early and then give up 3, 2 of which happened before Josip Ilicic even saw the field for Atalanta. Now, Atalanta is scoring goals at a ridiculous rate right now. They are arguably the most informed team in the world. So it's not shocking. They've done this to other teams before. But if you're Lazio, it's absolutely brutal for 2 reasons. One, yes, they were a point behind, but they actually going into this game controlled their own destiny because they get to play Juventus. So if they would have won out, they would have won the league. Now you're 4 points back, which means you not only need to beat Juventus, but then you need Juventus to drop a point somewhere. And it's not out of the realm of possibility, but those two things happening together, I don't see. And really what this points to is Italy is a very similar situation to Germany in the sense that, Bayern and Juve are not so far ahead of everybody else like PSG is in France that it's nearly incomprehensible to envision another team winning the league. But the problem that your Lazios and your Dortmunds run into, it's not that they don't have the talent to do it, but it's that you have such a thin margin of error. You can't have a game like Lazio had, and you can't throw away a 2-goal lead. Juventus is going to make you pay. I mean, Juventus hasn't been spectacular this year, but they're going to keep the pressure on you, and you just can't make mistakes. You have to rise to the challenge every single game, or you're going to end up second. And it's what happened with Dortmund, particularly in that second matchup with Bayern. They could have really made things interesting, but they just didn't do enough in that game. And Lazio is now sort of finding itself in the same position that it's possible to beat these teams, but you have to be really, really consistent. You have to sort of have that extra edge that nobody has been able to in recent memory, and that's why you see Juve and Bayern continuing to win these leagues. They know how to do it, and nobody else has proven that they have that extra intangible quality to really mount a challenge that goes from start to finish. So that's the other game to highlight. So Juve plays Lecce, and then Lazio goes and plays Fiorentina in their next game. The other prominent game in Italy, AC Milan-Roma. Roma's fighting for the Champions League, picked up a nice win yesterday. AC Milan is fighting for the Europa League. It's just two of the bigger clubs. Wanted to mention this just for the prominence of the game, but really this was supposed to be about Juve and Lazio. Now it's just sort of, can Juve close this thing out because Lazio gave it back to him. Spain, it's about two teams. Barcelona, Real Madrid, they're still in action. They keep winning, which means this is, like we talked about on Tuesday, this is absolutely Real Madrid's to lose. They drop I'm not convinced Barcelona is going to be perfect to the end, but there's enough of a probability of that Madrid can't feel like if you draw here or there, you're going to be fine. I think whoever's going to win is going to, at a maximum, drop 2 points the rest of the way. I can't envision somebody losing and winning this league, but I'm taking Real Madrid. We talked about their schedule is easier. They're playing really well. So that's what's happening in Spain. Atletico Madrid's done their job to get back into third, but it's really about these two and who can come away with the title. Finally, it's FA Cup weekend in England, which is strange thinking about that in the middle of June. But before we get to the FA Cup, Manchester City-Chelsea this afternoon. Liverpool wins the league if Manchester City does not win, which would kind of be a disappointment to not see Liverpool clinch it on their own merits. But at the end of the day, they've waited so long, they don't care. And Manchester City's in this really interesting spot where they're not particularly playing for anything right now. They're not going to win the league. They're probably not playing for a Champions League spot, although they would already more or less have that wrapped up because they're probably going to be banned. So really they're playing for two things. You're playing for an FA Cup to try and get more trophies, and you're playing to prepare yourself for this season's Champions League, which is massive for them, assuming they don't get to play next year, because this is your chance to actually win. So they're sort of just going through the motions and destroying people in the process in the Premier League right now. But there's one player on that team that does have something to play for, and that's Phil Foden. Phil Foden was phenomenal against Burnley, and with David Silva departing this summer, or now fall or whatever, after the season, That's Phil Foden's spot. If Phil Foden can convince Pep Guardiola during the rest of this season that he's good enough to take that responsibility on at such a young age, he's going to be a starter for him next year, which means all of a sudden he is very much in contention to be the starting number 10 for England in the Euros next summer. You look at the other spot, people in that competing for that spot, your James Madisons, your Jack Grealishes, your Dele Allis. None of them are particularly inspiring. I am very much in the camp that if it's played tomorrow, you start James Madison. But if Phil Foden can get on the field regularly throughout an entire season for Man City, that's absolutely his spot. If he continues to develop at the rate he's going, he's a phenomenal talent. So I did want to point that out, that yes, Manchester City's not really playing for anything at this moment in time. But Phil Foden is absolutely benefiting from this, and he's going to come out one of the biggest winners, assuming things continue the way they're going. You got Aston Villa Wolves also, just wanted to briefly mention that. Another Champions League relegation battle, which I think is just always fascinating. Can Aston Villa get some momentum on that late equalizer? Is Wolves going to continue doing what they've been doing? The other game I want to highlight, which is an FA Cup game. The other ones are not as interesting matchups, so we're not going to talk about those. But Leicester City, Chelsea. So Chelsea goes from playing Manchester City to then playing an FA Cup quarterfinal against the team right in front of them in the table right now. But if you're Chelsea, you got to feel really good about this. Brendan Rodgers got destroyed by Graham Potter on Tuesday. It just confuses me when Leicester lines up in anything but a 4-1-4-1 with the players on their team. And I know it was a squad rotation, but you still chose Kelechi Iheanacho, a second striker, over your Mark Albrightons, your Iosi Perez's, to pair out wide with Damari Gray, who also got the start. And then Brendan Rodgers decided to play two holding midfielders, which means that you're arguably your two most important, or at least two main goal-scoring attacking threats. We'll put it that way, because Wilfred Ndidi is one of the more valuable players on this team. But that puts James Madison out wide, which is not where he wants to be, which is not where his best position is, and it takes away Jamie Vardy's ability to make diagonal runs from his spot as a lone number 9. That's what separates him from just about any other striker in the world, is the fact that he runs diagonally. He's very happy to go chase balls in the channels to hold them up. That's because of his pace. That's what he does so well, in addition to being a terrific finisher. But when you put Kelechi Iheanacho or anybody else up there with him, it takes away his ability to do that. So Brendan Rodgers, by rolling out this 4-4-2, took away James Madison as a central attacking threat, the creative force that then links with Vardy, and then he put Vardy on an island without any service as a result. And Vardy wasn't able to really get anything over the top because he wasn't able to run into the channels the way he usually does when it's just him as the striker. Brendan Rodgers has done a great job this season, obviously, getting that team to third place. But I've never been convinced of the idea that all of a sudden he's developed into somebody who's going to go, he was linked with the Arsenal job before I went to Mikel Arteta. There are just, every once in a while, there's one of these weird tactical decisions he makes that just leave me puzzled. And the other one that comes to mind, he played a central box, 4-person midfield against Liverpool. He played the most horizontally challenged formation against the most horizontally dangerous team in the league. And Liverpool ran roughshod over him, in part because there was no width to Leicester's attack. Part of this is just rust. They have not been good since they came back. They've managed not to lose, but it was an uninspiring 0-0 against Brighton. They were lucky that Kasper Schmeichel was able to save the penalty. But Brendan Rodgers has some questions to answer, and the way that they're playing, that's where this all started. Either they're going to get an incredible amount of momentum, and this is going to change really quickly if they're able to beat Chelsea. But at this moment in time, the way Chelsea's going, and we'll see what happens against Manchester City later today, but you got to feel pretty good if you're Chelsea about your chances of getting through to the semifinals, and then at that point, your team is good enough that on any given day they can beat anybody. So I'm really curious to see what happens here.